Liam stood at the fence line, his gnarled hands resting on a weathered post, not so much holding him up as anchoring him to the spot. For 40 years, this land had been his to shape and to be shaped by. He knew its every whisper and sigh, the way the light fell across the red mesas in the late afternoon, the secret paths the deer took to the creek. And now, it was telling him of an intrusion, a sickness on the horizon. It was a tension he felt in the pit of his stomach, a low, constant hum of wrongness that had been building for weeks, a storm gathering just beyond the rim of the world. He could feel the ghost of their visits clinging to the air around the ranch house. The men in their fine, dust-coated coats, their boots polished, but their intentions muddy. They had come with smiles that never reached their eyes that assessed his land not for its beauty or its life, but for its value on a ledger sheet. They spoke of progress, of railroads and cattle empires, of the future that was coming whether he willed it or not. They offered money, more than he had ever seen in his life, but their words were empty shells, hollow promises that rang false against the solid truth of the land. Each refusal from Liam's lips had been met with a slight tightening of those professional smiles, a subtle hardening in those cold, calculating gazes. They weren't used to being told no, especially not by an old man clinging to a patch of dirt. To Liam, this dirt was everything. It was the memory of his young wife, now long gone, planting the first saplings by the porch. It was the blood from his own knuckles, split on the stubborn rocks while building the corral. It was the sweat that had dripped from his brow into the soil during 100 scorching summers, and the tears he had shed into it during one brutal winter that had taken half his herd. This land was his family Bible, his history book, his confession. Every fence post was a verse, every cattle track a chapter. Selling it would be like tearing out his own spine. From the corner of his eye, Liam watched his son, Ethan, mending a harness near the barn. The boy, barely 20, was learning. He was learning the physical work, the way to swing an axe and rope a steer, but more importantly, he was learning to read the unspoken language of the land and of his father. Liam saw the way Ethan's movements would slow, his own young shoulders tensing in unconscious mimicry of his father's posture. The boy could sense the change in the air, the heavy silence that had replaced Liam's usual low humming as he worked. He watched the way his father's jaw would set, a granite line against the coming pressure, and the way his eyes, usually so calm and measured when surveying his domain, now constantly scanned the horizon, searching for the source of the unease. It was a language of subtle shifts, of tightened lips, and the specific way a man holds his body when he knows a fight is coming. Ethan was becoming fluent in it. The land itself seemed to hold its breath. The birds were quieter than usual. The usual playful scolding of the jays from the cottonwood trees was absent. The wind, that constant companion of the plains, had died down to a nervous whisper, rustling the dry grass with a sound like dead men walking. The very light seemed different, harsher, casting long, distorted shadows that clawed at the earth. It was the calm before the storm, a pregnant pause in the rhythm of life on the ranch. Liam remained at his post, a solitary sentinel against the vast, empty landscape, his old but still powerful frame a testament to a lifetime of endurance. He was a man rooted deep like the ancient oak by the creek, and he could feel the first tremors of the axe aimed at his roots. He didn't know when the blow would fall or what form it would take, but the certainty of its coming was a cold stone in his gut. The shadow was lengthening, creeping across his fields, inching its way toward his doorstep. The violence did not arrive with shouting or threats, but with the soft, rhythmic crunch of hooves on dry earth. 7 riders emerged from the heat shimmer, their approach deliberate and unervingly quiet. At their head was Sloan, a man whose face seemed carved from the same cold, unyielding granite as the distant mesas. His eyes, the color of a winter sky just before a blizzard, swept over the ranch, assessing, dismissing, and finally settling on Liam, who had stepped out from the porch to meet them. There were no pleasantries this time, no false smiles, or offers wrapped in the language of business. The air was stripped bare of pretense, heavy only with the promise of what was to come. Liam stood his ground, his own weathered frame a stark contrast to their polished brutality. His refusal to sell his land spoken not as a plea, but as a simple, unchangeable fact of nature. Sloane did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He merely gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The world exploded into a frenzy of controlled, brutal motion. Two of the men dismounted with practiced ease, their movements efficient and devoid of emotion. The first blow was a hard, sickening crack of a pistol whip against Liam's temple, dropping the old man to his knees before he could even raise his arms. Ethan, who had been watching from the barn, felt his body turn to ice, then to fire. A raw, wordless scream tore from his throat as he launched himself forward, a young bull charging a wall of seasoned butchers. He didn't make it 3 steps before a third rider, a hulking man with a network of scars covering his knuckles, caught him with a vicious backhand that sent him sprawling into the dust, the taste of copper and dirt filling his mouth. What followed was a methodical, almost ritualistic dismantling of a man's pride and strength. They did not beat Liam in a wild rage. They worked on him with the cold precision of men slaughtering a steer. Heavy boots connected with his ribs, each impact producing a muffled, breathy grunt. A fist drove into his kidney, arching his back in a spasm of agony. Ethan, pinned to the ground by a boot on his neck, was forced to watch, his vision blurred with tears of rage and helplessness. He saw the stoic resolve in his father's eyes flicker and then extinguish, replaced by a dull, distant acceptance that was far more terrifying than any cry of pain. This was not a fight. It was an execution of spirit, a lesson in powerlessness taught with fists and leather. When it was over, the men stepped back, their breathing only slightly elevated. Liam lay curled on the ground, a broken vessel, his breath coming in wet, shallow gasps. Sloane finally dismounted, his boots landing softly near Liam's head. He knelt down, his voice a low, conversational murmur that carried perfectly in the sudden, awful silence. He spoke of the week's deadline, of the inevitability of their return, of the finality of the next visit. Each word was a carefully placed stone, building a wall around the broken man at his feet. Then, as if concluding a piece of mundane business, he stood, brushed a speck of dust from his trousers, and remounted his horse. The riders turned as one and moved off, their departure as quiet and menacing as their arrival, leaving nothing but a cloud of dust and the wreckage of 2 lives in their wake. The weight crushing Ethan's neck vanished. He scrambled on his hands and knees to his father's side. The sight up close was worse than from a distance. Liam's face was a mask of swelling and blood, one eye already sealed shut. But it was the look in his father's one good eye that would be seared into Ethan's memory forever. It wasn't pain, nor was it fear. It was a profound, bone-deep weariness, the look of a man who has seen the future and found it empty, a man who had fought the world for decades and now felt the world finally winning. As Ethan struggled to lift his father's limp, heavy body, a sound escaped Liam's lips, a faint, broken sigh that held the weight of a surrendered dream. In that moment, something cold and hard crystallized within Ethan's chest, freezing the tears and burning away the panic. The boy who had charged blindly into a fight was gone. In his place was someone new, a man forged in the crucible of his father's blood and his own humiliation, his mind no longer clouded by fear, but sharpened by a single clear and terrible purpose. The storm had broken, and it had left behind not ruin, but resolve. The memory surfaced through the haze of grief and fury like a life buoy in a storm-tossed sea. It was a story told years ago by the firelight, his father's voice low and resonant, a tale not of conquest, but of a single, unthinking moment of mercy. He spoke of finding a Comanche boy, no older than Ethan was then, caught in a flash flood, his small body battered against the rocks, moments from being swallowed by the churning, muddy water. Liam hadn't thought of treaties or fear or the generations of bloodshed between their peoples. He had simply acted, plunging into the violent current, fighting the river for the child's life, and carrying him, half drowned and bleeding, back to the distant, watchful Comanche scouts. It was an act that had earned him not land or gold, but something far more rare and potent in this harsh land, a sacred debt from a people who held honor above all else. The boy he had saved was the son of their war chief, Takota. In the fractured mosaic of Ethan's panic, This single memory clicked into place, forming a desperate, terrifying, and perfect plan. It was their only chance. It was a thread of hope thinner than a spider's silk, leading into the heart of the very darkness most men feared. But he had no other line to grasp. The hours that followed were a grim ballet of preparation, set to the soundtrack of his father's ragged, feverish breathing from the next room. Each gasp was a lash against Ethan's soul, urging him to move faster. He worked by the dim, guttering light of a single oil lamp, its flame casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock his efforts. He chose his sturdiest horse, a broad-chested bay gelding named Atlas, and brushed its coat with a methodical, almost frantic rhythm, the familiar task a small anchor in a world coming undone. He filled his saddlebags with practicalities that felt absurd in the face of such overwhelming odds. Strips of dried venison that tasted like ash in his mouth, a waterskin that seemed pathetically small for the vast, arid lands he would cross, a box of cartridges for the heavy rifle he slung over his shoulder. Every item he packed was a silent admission that he was leaving, that he was placing his faith in a story and a people he had never met, over the tangible reality of his father's broken body in the next room. When the time came to leave, he stood for a long moment in the doorway of his father's bedroom. Liam was asleep or unconscious, his face a grotesque mask of purple and blue in the faint light. The rise and fall of his chest was shallow, a fragile bellows that could still at any moment. A part of Ethan screamed to stay, to bar the doors, to meet Sloane's return with a blaze of gunfire and die on this land beside his father. But the new, cold part of him, the part forged in the dust of the yard, knew that such a death would be meaningless. It would not protect the land. It would merely surrender it. He reached out, his fingers hesitating just above his father's bandaged shoulder, a touch he could not bring himself to complete for fear of waking him, for fear of having to explain the inexplicable. The silence in the room was a physical weight, broken only by that terrible, wet breathing. He turned and walked out of the house, closing the door softly behind him as if not to disturb the dying. The night air was cool, a stark contrast to the fever heat of the cabin. Atlas stood ready, a dark silhouette against the star-dusted sky. Ethan swung into the saddle, the leather creaking a familiar protest. He took one last, long look at the ranch, the outline of the corral, the shape of the barn against the horizon, the dark, silent bulk of the house that held everything he had ever loved. It was not a look of farewell, but one of a man etching a promise into his soul. He was not abandoning this place. He was going to war for it. He pulled the reins, turning Atlas away from the warmth of memory and toward the cold, trackless expanse of the Comancheria, a land of legend and terror, where few white men ventured and even fewer returned. The hoofbeats began, a slow, steady rhythm that carried him away from his past and into a future that held only two possible outcomes: salvation or a grave in the endless, silent dark. The land beyond the familiar boundaries of his father's ranch was a different world, a brutal, sun-scorched canvas of suffering. The two-day ride stretched into an eternity of relentless sun and searing wind. Ethan pushed himself and his horse, Atlas, with a single-minded desperation that bordered on self-destruction. He moved through a landscape of shattered rock and thorny, grasping plants, where the air shimmered with heat, and the only sounds were the scuttling of unseen creatures and the mournful cry of the wind funneling through narrow canyons. Every jolt of the saddle sent a fresh spike of agony through his own bruised body, a constant, physical reminder of the violence that had set him on this path. He dared not stop for long, swallowing his water in miserly sips, the image of his father's broken form lying in the cabin a more potent fuel than any food. Sleep, when it claimed him for a few fitful minutes, was not restful. It was a theater of horrors where he relived the sound of cracking bone and the cold finality in Sloane's eyes over and over again. The wilderness was not just testing his endurance. It was scraping him raw, stripping away the last vestiges of the boy he had been, leaving behind a core of hardened resolve. He found the first signs on the morning of a second day, a faint, almost invisible thread of smoke rising from behind a jagged ridge, a place no settler would ever think to look. Then the tracks, unshod ponies, moving in a dispersed pattern that spoke of a deep, innate knowledge of the land. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of both hope and terror. He was close, but being close to a Comanche camp uninvited was a quicker form of suicide than thirst or exposure. Remembering his father's old lessons, spoken in a voice of rare respect for these people, he slowed Atlas to a walk. He consciously forced his breathing to steady, willed the tension from his shoulders, and raised his empty hands, palms open and forward, high into the air. He then stopped and waited. The minutes stretched, each one an agony of suspense. The sun beat down on his raised arms, the muscles screaming in protest, but he did not lower them. This was the first test, and he would not fail. They appeared as if born from the very rock and shadow. One moment, the canyon was empty. The next, 3 warriors stood before him, their presence so sudden and silent that Atlas shied violently. They were young, their faces impassive, but their eyes held a sharp, penetrating intelligence that missed nothing. They took in his exhausted horse, the dust caking his clothes, the dark, dried bloodstains on his shirt that were not his own, and his raised, empty hands. One of them spoke, his words a sharp, foreign cadence that meant nothing to Ethan. Swallowing the dry knot of fear in his throat, Ethan focused on the warrior, who seemed to be the leader. He did not try to gesture or explain. Instead, he voiced the only 2 words that held any power here. The name his father had told him was a key, spoken with as much respect as he could muster. "Dakota," he said, his voice rough from dust and disuse. "I need to see Dakota." A subtle shift occurred in the warrior's expression, a flicker of recognition and surprise that was there and gone in an instant. The man exchanged a quiet, weighted glance with his companions, then gave a short, sharp nod. He gestured for Ethan to dismount. Ethan complied, his legs nearly buckling under him as his feet hit the ground. One of the other warriors took Atlas's reins, and their leader turned and started walking, expecting Ethan to follow. They moved through a labyrinth of narrow passages and hidden defile, a route so cunningly concealed that Ethan knew he would never find his way back alone. After 20 minutes that felt like an hour, the canyon walls opened up, and the camp lay spread before him. It was a scene of organized, vibrant life. Hide-covered lodges, children playing near a central fire, women working on hides, and everywhere, the watchful eyes of warriors. And in the center of it all, standing and waiting, was the man he had come to find. Dakota was taller than the others, his frame lean and powerful. His face was a road map of a hard life, cross-hatched with scars that spoke of countless battles. His hair was streaked with gray, but his posture was that of a man in his prime, radiating an authority that was as natural as the rock around them. He watched Ethan's approach, his dark eyes missing no detail, the weary stumble, the desperate set of his jaw, the story told by the blood on his shirt. He knew, even before a word was spoken, that the boy standing before him was the bearer of terrible news, a living reminder of a debt from the past that was now demanding payment in the present. Ethan stopped a respectful distance away, meeting the chief's gaze, his own filled with a raw, unvarnished plea. He didn't bow or grovel. He simply began to speak, his voice low and strained, recounting the attack, describing his father's condition, and naming Sloan. He spoke of the 1-week deadline, of the certain death that awaited his father if help did not come. He laid the entire, desperate situation at Dakota's feet, his final, silent question hanging in the air between them. Would the honor of the Comanche, a debt owed for a life saved, extend to saving another? The silence that followed Ethan's words was not one of hesitation, but of decision. Dakota's face, a mask of weathered stone, showed no emotion, but a fire had been lit deep within his eyes. He turned from Ethan and spoke a single, guttural command that carried across the entire camp. The effect was instantaneous and breathtaking. The quiet, domestic scene erupted into a controlled, silent storm of motion. The camp did not descend into chaos. It transformed. It was a living organism shifting its purpose entirely. Women began swiftly striking lodges, bundling possessions with practiced efficiency. Warriors, who moments before had been resting or mending gear, moved to their horses. There were no shouted orders, no panic, only a profound and disciplined sense of urgency. Within an hour, what had been a village was a mounted column of over 200 warriors, their faces set in grim lines, their eyes sharp and focused. Ethan was given a fresh horse, and he found himself riding at the front of this incredible force beside Dakota. The thunder of hooves was a rolling wave of sound that echoed his own pounding heart. He was no longer a desperate boy pleading for help. He was riding at the vanguard of an army he had summoned, a tide of retribution rolling back toward his home. They rode with a speed and endurance that defied belief, stopping only when the horses were on the verge of collapse. Dakota pushed them hard, understanding the fragile thread of time on which Liam's life hung. Ethan watched the landscape change, the rocky badlands giving way to the familiar grasslands of his home territory. On the second evening, they crested a low rise, and there, in the distance, was the Flynn Ranch. The sight of the lonely, dark house sent a jolt of fear through him. Was his father still alive inside? The urge to break from the column and gallop the final distance was almost overwhelming. But Dakota's plan was already in motion. With a series of hand signals, he dispersed his warriors. They melted into the landscape, becoming one with the shadows of the boulders, sinking into the tall grass of the creek beds, disappearing into the groves of cottonwood trees. By the time the last sliver of sun vanished, the ranch was surrounded by an invisible, unbreakable ring of steel and resolve. Ethan was made to wait with Dakota in a concealed position, his body thrumming with a painful mix of anticipation and dread. The night was long and cold, every rustle of grass or call of a night bird sounding like the approach of Sloane's men. Dawn broke pale and cold, painting the sky in shades of gray and rose. And then they came, 7 figures etched against the morning light, riding with the slow, arrogant confidence of men who believed they owned the world. Sloane was at their head, a faint, contemptuous smile playing on his lips as he surveyed the silent, seemingly abandoned ranch. They dismounted casually, tying their horses to the porch rail as if they were already home. Sloane himself strode toward the front door, his hand reaching for the latch, his men fanning out behind him, their postures relaxed, their victory assured. They were 20 feet from the house, then 15, then 10. Ethan, watching from his hiding place, could see the casual cruelty in their expressions, the utter certainty of their power. It was a sight that burned into his soul. It was then that Dakota gave his signal, not with a shout, but with a sharp, rising whistle that cut through the morning air. The earth itself seemed to move. From behind every rock, from within every patch of grass, from the shadows of every tree, the Comanche warriors rose. They did not scream or charge. They simply stood, hundreds of them, materializing from the very landscape, forming a perfect, silent, and impenetrable circle around the 7 men. The air, which a moment before had been still and heavy with Sloane's arrogance, now crackled with a terrifying, silent energy. The change on the raiders' faces was instantaneous and total. Their confidence shattered, replaced by a slack-jawed, wide-eyed terror. Their hands, which had been resting near their guns, froze. Sloane's smile vanished, his cold eyes darting wildly, calculating odds that did not exist. He was utterly, completely trapped. Sloane, his voice a strained attempt at its former authority, tried to bluster. He claimed this was a private matter, that it didn't concern the Comanche. His words, which had once carried the weight of threats, now sounded small and pathetic, swallowed by the vast, silent presence of the warriors. Dakota stepped forward from the circle, his movements slow and deliberate, his own power rendering Sloane insignificant. He did not yell. He spoke in a low, clear voice that carried absolute finality. He recounted their crime, beating an old man, a man who had saved the life of his son. He named their dishonor. When one of Sloane's men, the one with scarred knuckles, made a sudden, desperate twitch toward his rifle, 3 arrows thudded into the ground at his feet in perfect unison, their feathered shafts vibrating. The message was unequivocal. The next ones would not miss. The man's hands shot into the air. Sloane's defiance crumbled completely. The humiliation of being so thoroughly outmatched, of seeing his own mortality reflected in hundreds of impassive faces, broke him. Takota gave them a single simple choice: leave now and never return, or die where they stood. The threat was not just for today. It was a promise that would follow them forever. The calculation in Sloane's eyes was brief. Pride had no place against annihilation. He gave the order to mount up. The circle of warriors parted just enough to create a narrow path east, away from the ranch. The 7 men rode through it, their postures slumped, their spirits broken, whipping their horses into a frantic gallop until they were nothing more than a shameful cloud of dust on the horizon. The storm had not just passed. It had been turned back on itself and utterly destroyed. The silence that followed Ethan's words was not one of hesitation, but of decision. Takota's face, a mask of weathered stone, showed no emotion, but a fire had been lit deep within his eyes. He turned from Ethan and spoke a single, guttural command that carried across the entire camp. The effect was instantaneous and breathtaking. The quiet, domestic scene erupted into a controlled, silent storm of motion. The camp did not descend into chaos. It transformed. It was a living organism shifting its purpose entirely. Women began swiftly striking lodges, bundling possessions with practiced efficiency. Warriors, who moments before had been resting or mending gear, moved to their horses. There were no shouted orders, no panic, only a profound and disciplined sense of urgency. Within an hour, what had been a village was a mounted column of over 200 warriors, their faces set in grim lines, their eyes sharp and focused. Ethan was given a fresh horse, and he found himself riding at the front of this incredible force beside Takota. The thunder of hooves was a rolling wave of sound that echoed his own pounding heart. He was no longer a desperate boy pleading for help. He was riding at the vanguard of an army he had summoned, a tide of retribution rolling back toward his home. They rode with a speed and endurance that defied belief, stopping only when the horses were on the verge of collapse. Takota pushed them hard, understanding the fragile thread of time on which Liam's life hung. Ethan watched the landscape change, the rocky badlands giving way to the familiar grasslands of his home territory. On the second evening, they crested a low rise, and there, in the distance, was the Flynn Ranch. The sight of the lonely, dark house sent a jolt of fear through him. Was his father still alive inside? The urge to break from the column and gallop the final distance was almost overwhelming. But Takota's plan was already in motion. With a series of hand signals, he dispersed his warriors. They melted into the landscape, becoming one with the shadows of the boulders, sinking into the tall grass of the creek beds, disappearing into the groves of cottonwood trees. By the time the last sliver of sun vanished, the ranch was surrounded by an invisible, unbreakable ring of steel and resolve. Ethan was made to wait with Takota in a concealed position, his body thrumming with a painful mix of anticipation and dread. The night was long and cold, every rustle of grass or call of a night bird sounding like the approach of Sloane's men. Dawn broke pale and cold, painting the sky in shades of gray and rose. And then they came, 7 figures etched against the morning light, riding with the slow, arrogant confidence of men who believed they owned the world. Sloane was at their head, a faint, contemptuous smile playing on his lips as he surveyed the silent, seemingly abandoned ranch. They dismounted casually, tying their horses to the porch rail as if they were already home. Sloane himself strode toward the front door, his hand reaching for the latch, his men fanning out behind him, their postures relaxed, their victory assured. They were 20 feet from the house, then 15, then 10. Ethan, watching from his hiding place, could see the casual cruelty in their expressions, the utter certainty of their power. It was a sight that burned into his soul. It was then that Takota gave his signal, not with a shout, but with a sharp, rising whistle that cut through the morning air. The earth itself seemed to move. From behind every rock, from within every patch of grass, from the shadows of every tree, the Comanche warriors rose. They did not scream or charge. They simply stood, hundreds of them, materializing from the very landscape, forming a perfect, silent, and impenetrable circle around the 7 men. The air, which a moment before had been still and heavy with Sloane's arrogance, now crackled with a terrifying, silent energy. The change on the raiders' faces was instantaneous and total. Their confidence shattered, replaced by a slack-jawed, wide-eyed terror. Their hands, which had been resting near their guns, froze. Sloane's smile vanished, his cold eyes darting wildly, calculating odds that did not exist. He was utterly, completely trapped. Sloane, his voice a strained attempt at its former authority, tried to bluster. He claimed this was a private matter, that it didn't concern the Comanche. His words, which had once carried the weight of threats, now sounded small and pathetic, swallowed by the vast, silent presence of the warriors. Dakota stepped forward from the circle, his movements slow and deliberate, his own power rendering Sloane insignificant. He did not yell. He spoke in a low, clear voice that carried absolute finality. He recounted their crime, beating an old man, a man who had saved the life of his son. He named their dishonor. When one of Sloane's men, the one with scarred knuckles, made a sudden, desperate twitch toward his rifle, 3 arrows thudded into the ground at his feet in perfect unison, their feathered shafts vibrating. The message was unequivocal. The next ones would not miss. The man's hands shot into the air. Sloane's defiance crumbled completely. The humiliation of being so thoroughly outmatched, of seeing his own mortality reflected in hundreds of impassive faces, broke him. Dakota gave them a single simple choice: leave now and never return, or die where they stood. The threat was not just for today. It was a promise that would follow them forever. The calculation in Sloane's eyes was brief. Pride had no place against annihilation. He gave the order to mount up. The circle of warriors parted just enough to create a narrow path east, away from the ranch. The 7 men rode through it, their postures slumped, their spirits broken, whipping their horses into a frantic gallop until they were nothing more than a shameful cloud of dust on the horizon. The storm had not just passed. It had been turned back on itself and utterly destroyed.